Hi there, and welcome to Reddit Confessions. Buckle up, because what I'm about to share isn't a story about a happy marriage gone wrong. It's a quiet disaster that everyone saw coming, except me. I wasn't supposed to be at that party. No, really. I had RSVP'd no. I had deleted the email. I had even told my coworkers I planned on spending that Friday evening deep cleaning my microwave and ordering Thai food for one. That was the truth. I had zero intention of stepping into a ballroom filled with people who knew both of us. People who probably whispered behind my back long before I caught up. But plans change when you finally stop lying to yourself. It wasn't one thing that broke me. It wasn't some dramatic discovery, no lipstick on a collar, no text from a stranger named Jay. It was something much worse: silence, distance, disinterest. For 2 years, I lived in a house where my wife didn't speak to me unless it was functional. Milk's expired. The trash is full. Did you pay the internet bill? There were no fights. No yelling. Not even a door slam. Just a steady, cold vacancy. Like I was renting space inside someone else's life. Her name is Nora. My wife, I mean. We've been together for 12 years. I say together loosely because for the last 2, we've existed like co-workers who hate their jobs but need the paycheck. She used to be funny, loud, the kind of woman who'd dance barefoot in the kitchen while I burned pancakes. Now she's just efficient, all sharp edges and polite sarcasm. So when she told me she was going to her company's retirement gala with a few colleagues, I nodded and said, "Have fun." I even ironed her dress shirt for her. That's the kind of man I am, pathetic apparently. It wasn't until 11:23 p.m. that night that I opened my old email, the one tied to my LinkedIn, and saw her boss had personally sent me an invite weeks ago. Not her. Him. Weird, right? I sat there staring at the glowing screen in my dim kitchen while leftovers congealed in the microwave behind me. My dog, Hank, snored in the corner. I should have closed the email and gone to bed. But instead, I called someone I hadn't seen in a while. Her name's Clara. And no, this isn't a story about cheating on a cheater. I'm not that guy. Clara is my cousin. But more importantly, she's a storm in high heels. The kind of woman who could shut down a whole room just by walking into it. Not because of how she looks, though, yeah, she's beautiful, but because of how she carries herself. When I asked her if she wanted to go to a corporate retirement party and pretend to be my date for one night, she didn't even blink. She just said, "What color is your tie? I'm matching it." And that's how I ended up walking into the Northview Grand Hotel's gold-trimmed ballroom with a woman on my arm who made every single head turn, including hers. Nora was mid-sentence, wine glass in hand, surrounded by 5 or 6 people, one of them being her coworker, Evan. Yeah, that Evan. The one who started showing up in stories too often. She saw me, and she froze. Her mouth parted just slightly, but no words came out. Evan turned to see what she was looking at. Then he laughed, like it was funny. Like I was funny. Clara leaned in and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "Wow, didn't you say this was going to be awkward?" It was. And it was just the beginning. I didn't expect the room to go that quiet. For a split second, it felt like the music dimmed, even though I know it didn't. Maybe it was just in my head, but as Clara and I stepped further into the ballroom, all eyes landed on us like we'd interrupted something sacred. Nora's hand was still hovering midair with her wine glass, and Evan, that smug weasel, gave me one of those awkward little nods, the kind you give someone you didn't expect to show up, especially with backup. I kept my posture straight and walked with a confidence I didn't really feel. My heart was thudding like I'd just run a mile, but I didn't let it show. Clara held onto my arm like we'd done this before. She whispered, "Breathe, Clyde," with a small smirk. It grounded me more than I care to admit. You don't realize how invisible you felt until someone looks at you like you're worth being seen. Nora used to look at me that way. She stopped sometime between her 3rd business retreat, and the morning I found that second phone she said was for work emergencies only. We made our way toward the main bar, and I could feel the heat of Nora's stare drilling into the side of my face. But she didn't approach. Not yet. No, she stayed by Evan, trying to pretend like nothing had just shattered in her world. I wasn't trying to cause a scene, but something about standing tall, finally not being the pathetic, overlooked husband, gave me a strange sort of peace. The bartender asked what we wanted, and Clara ordered something complicated with bourbon, citrus, and confidence. I just said, "Whatever she's having." I was shaking inside. But somehow I felt stronger with her there. I wasn't there for revenge. That's not my thing. I just wanted her to feel something, to notice me, to realize that the quiet man she dismissed had stopped begging for her attention and started reclaiming his dignity. I know that sounds dramatic, but after 2 years of being emotionally starved, a single moment of acknowledgement feels like oxygen. I didn't have to wait long. Nora finally broke from her little circle of laughter and pretense and walked toward us, her heels clicking with purpose, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. She smiled, or tried to, but it was stiff and trembling at the edges. "Clyde," she said, her voice just slightly too loud for the setting. "I didn't know you were coming." That's when Clara stepped slightly forward, her hand still on my arm, and said, "Oh, we were invited. Weren't we, darling?" She looked at me with those playful eyes that made it feel like we were in on some private joke. Nora's jaw clenched. There was a beat of silence, a pause that tasted like tension and stale wine. And then, from just behind Nora's shoulder, someone else appeared. Her boss, Mr. Halbert, a man I'd only met twice, but who, apparently, remembered me. "Clyde," he boomed. "Glad you could make it. And this must be your date?" His eyes sparkled as he looked at Clara. "And Nora?" Nora looked like she'd been hit by a slow-moving train. She turned to him and said quickly, "I didn't realize Clyde RSVP'd. I thought he—" Mr. Halbert cut her off with a chuckle. "Oh no, I invited him personally. Always good to see a supportive spouse. You know, we value that kind of loyalty in this company." That last part, I don't know if it was innocent or a subtle jab, but the way Nora's face twitched told me it landed like a punch. Clara was cool as ice. She shook his hand, introduced herself, and even complimented the venue. I barely had to speak. I just watched Nora unravel, piece by piece, as she realized that I wasn't the sad little man waiting at home anymore. And then it happened. Someone else, a woman from Nora's marketing team, came up behind me and whispered, "You deserve better, Clyde." We all knew. We just didn't know how to tell you. I turned slowly. My throat dried up. She didn't smile. She just gave me a nod, then walked off like she hadn't just dropped a bomb on my entire world. What did she mean, we all knew? How long had this been going on? And worse, how many people in this room had laughed at me behind my back? I didn't come for vengeance. But in that moment, I realized I'd already started getting it. If there was ever a moment when Nora wished she could disappear into thin air, it was that one. The second her colleague whispered that confession to me, we all knew. Something in her face just cracked. She blinked too fast. Her hands clenched. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one caught off guard. I was the one watching her panic. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the back of the woman who had just walked away, the one who said they all knew about Nora. Clara leaned in close to me and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded slowly, still processing, but my fingers were starting to tremble around the glass in my hand. Not from nerves, though. From the dawning realization that everything I had suspected barely scratched the surface. Nora stammered something about needing to get back to her table, but she didn't move. She just stood there, looking at me, searching my face like she was trying to figure out what I knew. Maybe she expected me to explode. Maybe she expected a scene, yelling, accusations, a shattered wine glass. But all I did was smile politely and say, "Clara, would you like to dance?" I wasn't trying to be theatrical. I wasn't even trying to hurt her. I just needed the air to shift. Clara took my hand and led me to the dance floor like we'd done this 100 times. The song was slow, jazzy, full of strings and subtle tension. We swayed gently, and for the first time in forever, I felt in control. From across the room, I could see Nora watching us. Watching me. She tried to act like she wasn't, but her eyes kept flicking over, and her wine glass, now on its second refill, tilted dangerously in her hand. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew something was building. The energy was off. The air felt heavier by the minute. Halfway through the song, Clara leaned in close again and murmured, "You know she's unraveling, right? She's terrified right now. You flipped the script." I didn't know what to say. All I could do was nod. Then, I kid you not, Evan tried to cut in. He walked up like it was nothing. Like he hadn't spent the last year sneaking around behind my back with the woman I built a life with. He tapped Clara on the shoulder, gave me a smug little smirk, and said, "Mind if I borrow your date for a minute?" Clara raised an eyebrow and looked at me first. I gave her a small nod. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She stepped aside and walked toward the edge of the floor while Evan slid in, all fake confidence and cheap cologne. "You're making a bit of a scene, Clyde," he said under his breath as we turned awkwardly through the crowd. "You really think this is the way to handle things?" I stared at him, stunned at how boldly hypocritical that was. "You slept with my wife, Evan," I said quietly. "The only scene here is the one you two made." He scoffed, actually scoffed, and said, "Man, you don't get it. Nora needed something more. You were comfortable, predictable. She outgrew that." My jaw clenched. I wanted to deck him right there, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Then why hasn't she left me? Why is she still wearing that ring?" He didn't answer. Instead, Nora appeared behind him, flushed, flustered, and clearly drunker than before. She grabbed his arm, pulled him back, and said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "Evan, stop. You're making it worse." Her eyes locked on mine, and in that moment, she forgot herself. She raised her voice. "Clyde, this childish act doesn't change anything. You think bringing some arm candy is going to erase years of you not being enough?" The music didn't stop, but the people around us did. Clara stepped forward, calm, poised, still holding her drink. She said one sentence. Funny, coming from someone who needed a backup plan while still married. Nora froze. Evan's jaw dropped. And in the span of 5 seconds, 4 heads turned, including her boss's assistant, who had definitely heard the whole thing. I stood still, barely breathing. Everything in my chest was rising, flooding. But I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked Nora in the eye and asked, "How long?" She didn't answer, but someone else did. From behind us, a voice I didn't recognize, a man in his 40s, probably from her department, muttered, "Almost a year since the Cancun conference." And just like that, the room erupted. People started murmuring, stepping away, pretending not to stare, but doing a terrible job at it. Evan turned beet red and looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Nora was trembling. I took Clara's hand and said, "I think we've seen enough." And we walked right past them. But the real twist, the one that truly blindsided me, was waiting just outside the ballroom doors. Because standing there, waiting with a tight jaw and a folder in hand, was someone who introduced himself simply as Internal Audit. I didn't expect anyone to be waiting outside that ballroom. I especially didn't expect him. The man in the tailored navy blazer, holding a sleek black folder, had the kind of presence that demanded attention without raising his voice. He wasn't one of the guests. He didn't have a drink in hand or a party smile plastered on his face. He was there with a purpose, and from the way his eyes landed on me, I knew I was about to be part of it. "Mr. Clyde Farrell?" he asked. His tone was low, calm, and careful, the kind of tone people use when they're about to open a door they know you won't be able to close. I hesitated. Clara stiffened beside me. "Yes," I replied slowly. He gave a small nod and opened the folder. "David Altman, Internal Audit and Ethics Committee for Luminex Corporation. I believe your wife is Mrs. Nora Farrell?" His eyes flicked up, reading me, measuring something beneath my expression. I blinked. "Yes. Why?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the passing guests wouldn't hear. "This is going to sound abrupt, but I need to ask you a few questions. Privately, if possible. It concerns ongoing investigations that may involve your wife's conduct with other senior staff. This includes the man she was seen with tonight, Mr. Evan Radley." I just stood there, numb, my ears ringing. Everything I had just walked away from inside that ballroom suddenly felt like the tip of a much uglier iceberg. Clara cleared her throat, snapping me out of my trance. "You're telling him now? Like this? At a party?" David didn't flinch. "We've tried official communication channels, but nothing's come back with clarity. Mr. Farrell, we believe your wife may be involved in multiple breaches of policy, including inappropriate relationships with subordinates, misuse of corporate travel funds, and falsified reporting on client meetings. I know this is a lot, but I thought you deserved to know before things get formal." I swallowed hard. My stomach turned. Suddenly everything made sense. The Cancun trip, the surprise promotions, the overnight strategy retreats that didn't appear on her calendar, the second phone, the late-night whispers in the bathroom. Clara stepped in before I could speak. "He's not giving you any statements tonight. You can send this through his attorney." David didn't seem surprised. He nodded once more, handed me a sealed envelope, and said, "You'll want to read this carefully. We'll be in touch within 48 hours. He walked off like it was a regular Tuesday, like he hadn't just detonated the floor beneath me. We got to the valet stand in silence. Clara reached out and rubbed my shoulder gently. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softer now, more real. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My brain was spinning in 12 directions at once. My marriage was already in pieces, but now it was looking more like a crime scene. Nora hadn't just cheated. She might have dragged her whole career down with her and left a trail of corporate wreckage in the process. When the car pulled up, Clara and I got in, and I just sat there, staring at the envelope. I didn't open it. Not yet. I was too afraid of what it would confirm. Too afraid that this entire night, which had started as a silent stand of self-respect, was going to become something much messier. As the city lights passed by outside, Clara finally said, "You don't deserve this. You didn't cause any of this. Don't let her convince you otherwise when she tries." And I knew she was right. But it wasn't over yet. The real explosion came the next morning. Because at 6:13 a.m., Nora stormed into my apartment, mascara smeared, still wearing her party dress from the night before, and slapped the envelope out of my hand before I could even open it. Her voice was shaking as she hissed, "What the hell did you tell them?" I stared at her, stunned. What I told them? I didn't tell them anything, Nora. I just found out last night. Her breath caught. Her eyes went wide. She realized, right then, that she had just confessed to everything. And suddenly, her phone, the second one she thought I didn't know about, lit up on the kitchen counter. 3 missed calls. From Evan. But the name didn't say Evan. It said C.A.R. Clara looked at the screen, then looked at me. "Code name?" she asked. Nora froze. I picked up the phone and said, "Let's see what else she's been hiding." And this time, she didn't try to stop me. I didn't want to touch that phone. I really didn't. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find. No, I already had a gut feeling that it was a vault of betrayal. But because I knew once I opened it, there was no going back. No mental trick, no polite rationalization. No, we can work through this. That phone was a one-way ticket out of denial. But I was done pretending. I picked it up, entered the code she didn't realize I knew, her childhood dog's name. How original. And within seconds I was staring at the tangled mess of her double life. And it wasn't just Evan. The messages with Evan were disgusting. Yeah. Condescending little jokes about me, about my small-town mind, about how I still thought she was coming home for me. But those weren't the worst. The worst were the threads labeled with initials I didn't recognize. B. M. TRX. Lily P. And one with nothing but a purple devil emoji. At first, I thought she was using code names for contacts. But then I realized they were actual people. Dozens of them. Co-workers. Clients. Hotel staff. People she spoke with, manipulated, played like chess pieces in some twisted corporate soap opera. The texts weren't always romantic. Some were transactional. Some were strategic. Some hinted at favors traded behind closed doors that had nothing to do with business. I didn't say a word as I scrolled. Nora just stood there in the corner of the room, arms crossed, trembling with a cocktail of rage and fear. I could tell she wanted to lunge forward and snatch it out of my hand. But she didn't. Because she knew if she did, I'd make it public. Clara stayed silent. She poured herself a cup of my weak coffee and watched the chaos unfold with that same calm strength she'd shown the night before. I think she knew I needed to go through it. Every ugly screenshot. Every thread that made my heart cave in just a little more. Then I found it. A folder. In her photo archive. It was titled Archive, Personal. Inside were dozens of images. Not just selfies or suggestive photos. Those were there, too. But pictures of her with me. Old photos, carefully selected, deliberately staged. Candles on the dinner table. Vacation shots. Anniversary cards. Every image came with a timestamp that didn't match reality. And next to many of them, I saw corresponding messages in the threads with her co-workers and supervisors. They were being used. Used to paint the picture of a healthy marriage. A normal life. Something she could show her company's board, or HR, or whoever might ask about inappropriate relationships or use of corporate perks. In reality, most of those photos were from years ago, recycled to make it seem like she was just a devoted wife with a predictable husband who had no idea she was orchestrating something entirely different behind the scenes. I looked at her, and my voice was so hoarse it barely sounded like mine. "You used our life as a prop." She didn't deny it. she just said. I had to keep everything looking stable. It's what they expect from someone in my position. That was the moment it clicked. She hadn't just betrayed me personally. She had commodified me. I was the wallpaper in her false narrative. The harmless husband who helped sell her version of success. She didn't need me for companionship. She needed me for credibility. That hit harder than anything else. Clara looked up then. You should walk, she said softly. Now, before this drags you deeper into her fallout. But I wasn't ready yet. Not because I still loved Nora. That was slipping fast, falling through the cracks like sand. I needed to understand one more thing. Why? So I asked, Nora, when did you stop loving me? She didn't answer immediately. She sat down at the kitchen island and stared at the floor. For a long moment, I thought she wouldn't say anything at all. Then, quietly, she muttered, I think, maybe I never did. Not in the way you thought. It didn't feel like a knife to the chest. It felt like my lungs had collapsed entirely. I nodded, numb, and walked out of the room. Into the hallway. Down the elevator. Clara followed me in silence. We drove without speaking, the city flashing by like a blur of cold light. When we got back to her apartment, I sat on her couch for nearly an hour, just holding that phone in my hands like it was radioactive. The truth had finally arrived. Unfiltered. Undeniable. And yet, somehow, the worst part wasn't that my wife had cheated on me. The worst part was that I had been reduced to a placeholder in someone else's success story. But I wasn't going to be quiet about it anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat on Clara's couch, fully dressed, the lights off except for the low orange glow spilling in from the street lamp outside her window. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional clink of her cat's collar as he wandered the hall like a ghost. Every few minutes, I checked the phone again, like some part of me hoped the messages would vanish or change, or reveal it had all been a prank with really dark commitment. But of course, they didn't. They stayed. Just like the realization did. This wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud, image management, a life built on manipulated perceptions. I wasn't a partner. I was camouflage. At 8:04 a.m., I got the call. David Altman again. The internal audit guy from the night before. He wanted to meet. Immediately. He said the board had expedited their concerns after an anonymous package had been dropped off at their headquarters that morning. Printed screenshots, email summaries, and a full timeline of personal activity patterns tied to Nora's travel expenses and HR-reviewed documents. I didn't send it. Clara didn't either. That meant someone else had access. Someone from inside. I told him I'd be there within the hour. Clara insisted on driving. I didn't argue. My hands were shaking too badly to handle a steering wheel. When we arrived, the building looked exactly like you'd expect a corporate headquarters to look. Sleek glass, too much beige, fake potted plants, and an artificial calm that made everything feel more surreal. They took us to a private conference room on the 17th floor. The windows overlooked the city, but all I could see was my reflection. Tired, hollowed out, betrayed beyond words. David was there with 2 other committee members. Legal counsel joined remotely via video. I thought I'd feel intimidated, but weirdly, I didn't. Something inside me had cracked open over the last 24 hours. I wasn't numb anymore. I was just clear. Crystal clear. They didn't waste time. They asked about the photos, the travel records, the fabricated timelines. I answered everything honestly, calmly, carefully. Clara handed over the phone. I watched as David scrolled, his expression unreadable, until he paused and looked at me. Mr. Farrell, do you have any idea how many departments this touches? I shook my head. At least 4, he said. And 2 promotions. One of which your wife may have leveraged by misrepresenting your marriage as part of a values-based leadership initiative. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I finally understood the full scope. My wife hadn't just lied about our love. She had marketed it, weaponized it, and then pocketed the bonuses. Are you going to fire her? I asked. David didn't answer directly. He said there would be a formal investigation, potential suspension, and immediate access restriction. But he added, with a glance toward the legal team's blinking screen, that this was now bigger than HR. I didn't need the details. I already knew what that meant. Before I left, David offered me something unexpected, support. Not just legal, but psychological. You're not the first spouse we've seen caught in the crossfire of corporate deception, he said, almost gently. You won't be the last. But you did the right thing coming forward. I wanted to say something cool or strong or emotionally profound. Instead, all I managed was, I didn't come forward. The truth did. Clara and I walked out of the building into sunlight that felt far too bright for what had just happened. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, I felt empty, like there was too much space inside my ribs and nowhere for it to go. But the story wasn't done yet. Because the minute I got home, I had 3 voicemails waiting from Nora's number. And the last one was unhinged. She screamed, cried, swore at me, then begged, said I'd ruined her life, that I was too weak to understand what real success takes. She accused me of betrayal, called Clara names, accused me of planting evidence, which made no sense. Her voice cracked halfway through the message, and then, somewhere near the end, she said something I'll never forget. You don't get to make me the villain just because you never had the spine to become anything better than background noise. That line hit different, not because it hurt, but because it proved exactly what I already knew. She never once saw me as an equal. I was a silent passenger in the life she was performing. A placeholder husband who didn't ask for much, didn't demand attention, didn't sparkle at parties. And now that I'd finally stepped out of the shadow, she hated me for it. I forwarded the voicemails to David. Then I deleted her number. But the drama wasn't over. Because 2 days later, she showed up at my work. Disheveled, red-eyed, wearing the same coat from the night of the party. And what she said next completely shifted everything I thought I knew. There's a specific kind of silence that settles when someone you once trusted shows up where they don't belong. The kind that feels thick, almost humid, like the air itself is holding its breath. That's the silence that crawled through the lobby of my office building when Nora walked in. My receptionist went stiff, unsure if she should announce her or call security. I just stood there by the front desk, coffee still steaming in my hand, unsure whether I was about to hear a plea, a threat, or both. She looked nothing like the confident, composed executive I'd watched command rooms. Her mascara was smudged, hair tied back hastily, coat wrinkled like she'd slept in her car. She clutched a leather purse like it was the only thing tethering her to earth. I need to talk to you, she said. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I just nodded once and led her to the small break room. It smelled like burnt popcorn and stale peppermint tea. Not exactly the setting for a final act of confession, but oddly fitting. She stood by the mini fridge. I stayed near the door. For a while, she just stared at me. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like she was trying to decide what version of the truth would work best. Finally, she spoke. They've locked me out of everything, she whispered. I don't even have access to my emails. Halberd won't return my calls. I had a meeting with legal this morning. They think I'm a liability. I kept my arms crossed. I wasn't going to console her. Not this time. You are, I said quietly. Her lip quivered at that, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, her voice dropped lower, angrier. You don't get it, Clyde. I built something. I built a life that people envied. I was on track for VP next year. Do you know how hard I worked for that? And now I'm being dismantled over some messages, some misjudgments? That audit committee doesn't care about the truth. They just want a scapegoat. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing. Some messages were sexual, manipulative, and strategic enough to qualify as both professional misconduct and personal destruction. You didn't just cheat on me, Nora. You marketed me as proof of your moral branding while using half your team as pawns. She glared at me, jaw clenched. You don't understand what it's like to have to be 10 times more impressive just to be taken seriously. You stayed safe. You played small. I had to climb. I had to do things you wouldn't understand. And lying to everyone along the way, that was just a bonus? I asked. She paced. Her hands trembled. But then she stopped. Looked at me with something new in her eyes. Not anger. Not guilt. Fear. You weren't supposed to be at that party, she said. That night, when you walked in with that woman, you destroyed everything. Everything was fine until then. That made me laugh. Actually laugh. A short, humorless burst that echoed off the vending machine. Everything was fine? You mean until I stopped playing along with your illusion? She stepped closer. Too close. Her voice dropped. You don't know who I was dealing with. Evan wasn't just a mistake. He had things on me. Things I let happen so I could stay in control. If this gets worse, they'll come after me. And if they do, I'll tell them you knew. That you were involved. That you were part of it. I stared at her. That's when it hit me. This wasn't desperation. It was leverage. A last-ditch bluff to drag me down with her. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the flash drive Clara had given me earlier that week, containing every message, every timestamp, every photo, every file. I held it up between us. I already gave them everything, I said. They know what I knew and when I knew it. You're not taking me with you. She went pale. Her hands dropped to her sides. The last breath of confidence left her. I loved you once, she said, barely above a whisper. No, I replied. You loved what I looked like beside you. Safe, predictable, silent. And then I opened the door. As she walked out into the hall, all I could think about was how long I'd stayed married to someone who'd rather collapse the world around her than admit she never built it honestly. Later that afternoon, I got a call from David. They'd launched an internal memo company-wide. Nora's name wasn't mentioned directly, but her position was listed as vacant pending restructuring. Her access was revoked permanently. Legal proceedings were under discussion. But that wasn't the twist. The real twist came in the form of an envelope left on my apartment doorstep that evening. Inside was a photo, not of me and Nora, but of Nora and another man. Not Evan. Someone older. Someone who looked eerily familiar. A sticky note was attached. It read, "You've only scratched the surface. Call me." And beneath it, a name. One I recognized from the board of directors. The photo in the envelope changed everything. Not because it revealed a new affair. That wasn't surprising anymore. But because of who was in it. The man standing beside Nora, arm wrapped casually around her waist in some dark-lit restaurant booth, wasn't just anyone. It was Marcus Delling, one of the senior board members at Luminex. Married, publicly virtuous, vocal about integrity-driven leadership, and apparently deeply entangled in my ex-wife's web of deceit. I stared at that sticky note for nearly a full minute. You've only scratched the surface. Call me. I didn't call. Not because I wasn't curious. Trust me, I was. But because I finally understood something I'd failed to grasp for years. That whole world Nora lived in. It wasn't built on trust or love or even ambition. It was built on manipulation. Deals behind closed doors. Smiles with knives tucked beneath them. The deeper I would have gone, the more entangled I'd have become. So instead of chasing one last twist, I threw the envelope into the fireplace at Clara's place and watched it burn. That night, something shifted. Not in Nora's life. Hers was unraveling without my help, but in mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't obsessing over where I stood in someone else's story. I was writing my own. Slowly, quietly, but honestly. In the weeks that followed, I started doing the things I'd put off for far too long. I took time off from work and went to stay with my brother's family in Maine. I started journaling. Not the kind where I vent into a void, but the kind where I ask myself real questions. Like, what do I actually want? What do I deserve? Who am I without Nora's shadow stretched across everything I touch? Clara and I stayed close, but we both agreed we needed space to breathe. She wasn't a rebound, and I wasn't her project. We cared for each other, deeply. But real healing isn't born from shared bitterness. It comes from peace. And finally, I was starting to find some. As for Nora, well, word eventually reached me that she'd quietly resigned before any formal termination was announced. Her reputation was scorched. Some said she moved to Chicago. Others said she was trying to start over with a new name, a new job, and the same lies. I don't know. I don't care. She can have the world she built, whatever pieces of it remain. I'm building something else. Myself. And if you're still here, listening, reading, wondering what the takeaway is from this whole messy chapter of my life, it's this. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's disconnection. It's walking away with your head high while they scramble to fix a world that only ever worked when you stayed quiet. Thank you for following my story here on Reddit Confessions. Now I'd love to hear from you. Has anyone ever tried to turn your life into their performance? Did you ever walk away from someone who underestimated you? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more real confessions, right here on Reddit Confessions. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.